Welcome to the Fantasy NASCAR podcast brought to you by RaceForThePrize.com. Darlington Cup Series. It's Sunday. We've got a starting grid. Let's predict who will lead laps. Who's going to be the dominator or hog? We will do several podcasts today. This one will exclusively focus on who we believe is going to be the drivers that finish up front and lead laps. How many of those drivers do we need in the lineup? I'll do another video later where we break down place differential and value, but for this, let's just exclusively look at who is going to be our hog. Now, first, I want to call your attention to a trend that we have seen with these hogs. If we look at the top fantasy outputs at Darlington over the last 7 races, mainly focusing on these next-gen cars. So last season, the top score, 27 hog or dominator points, 35. But the driver that scored the most dominator points or led the most laps only scored the 5th most fantasy points. In the spring race, where are they at? We look at the fall race and then the spring race of 2022. We scroll down and we see that often the drivers that score the most points are not necessarily finishing the races. Here we go. 2023 spring race, 66 fast laps led points. Ultimately only scores the 11th most fantasy points. The race before that only scores the 11th most fantasy points. Down here 33, but finishes with 19th on the board. It's a strange race. It's Darlington. But the biggest takeaway is on average. The driver that scores the most points is a hog. So you need one guy that is going to lead laps. He may not be the most, but he's going to be up there and likely win the race and survive. Second guy may not also get the most, but he will lead for a portion and finish the race. Then we see in the fantasy scoreboard, the guy that scores the 3rd most fantasy points typically is probably a place differential play, not a dominator, a guy that takes time to work his way to the front. Once he gets to the front towards the end, he does pick up some fast laps led. Same thing with our 4th pick. And then obviously 5 and 6, maybe you got more, but when we're building our lineups, 5 and 6 are probably going to be value plays. We're not going to be able to get the 5th most fantasy points, 6th most fantasy points. So in lineup construction wise, our 3rd and 4th pick, which usually you're going to have to spend a little bit more for, are going to be chasing place differential. Your 5th and 6th pick, typically we're saving money, and when you're saving money, you're not really able to go for hogs or dominators. So TLDR, I need 2. I need 2 hogs or 2 dominators. And hopefully I pick the one that doesn't wreck out. I pick the one that scores a significant amount of points and wins the race. Now, where do these guys come from? For the most part, the drivers that are leading laps and running fast laps are starting up front at Darlington, as you can see, on average. 33 points from the pole, 25 from second. We're getting them up front. Some are filtering from the top 10. But that's about it. Now, we do have some outliers, but you can probably guess who these outliers are. If you had to guess, what driver could possibly start 18th and score 27 fast laps led points? It was Kyle Larson. 33 here from 17th in the fall race, Martin Truex Jr. Now, another thing that you want to note about those circumstances, if you feel like, oh, maybe I should chase something down there, that's a Darlington 500. That's a Southern 500. There are more laps, and there's more of an opportunity for that driver to work through the field and lead those laps. In the spring race, we're not seeing that deepness. So for the most part, we're going to want to target the top 3 rows. Maybe we consider a little bit more going back to the top 10. But beyond that, I think we have narrowed down exactly where we want to go. And then you can see over here who generally has been the drivers to lead a bunch of laps, run a bunch of fast laps. Familiar names indeed. So let's go through the practice data and try to pick out who our guys are. Second thing that I want to go over with our practice data. Averages, well, first of all, I'm not worried about a single lap speed. I want to see more long run speed. I don't care if you were fast on one run. It's going to be about managing your tires in the long run at Darlington. It's going to be about replicating speed over and over and over, up against the wall, not hitting the wall. That is a better indicator of where you're going to run at Darlington, especially as we get late into this race and the runs get a little bit longer. So if you see someone like Tyler Reddick, not being very fast in the short run. 1 lap, not worried about it at all. Second thing I want to talk about is averages. These are going to be skewed. There's going to be issues with them. I'll quickly show you. I'm not high on Christopher Bell. Now, it's not because his averages don't look good. His averages are all funked up with an N. Why is that? Because it's an average. You take 5 laps and you run an average. You can run 4 great laps and then be in traffic, and then your average is bad. Especially with a 5-lap average. You get really one chance at this. Your first 5 laps or so, and if you have 1 bad lap in that first 5 laps, you're not going to be able to make up for that later in the run, because you can average out 5 laps at any point in your run, but the 5 laps that are going to average the best are typically going to be on the freshest of your tires. So at the beginning of a run, you don't necessarily nail it, or you have some sort of issue, traffic wise, then it's going to kill you. And you can see here with Christopher Bell early in the run, there's a couple situations that kills his average. But then as you run it out, the speed is there. So his averages are going to be terrible. I don't like him as much. We can look at that long run speed here in a second. But be careful using lap averages, and you're going to see that with a lot of these drivers. They run into traffic, they scrape the wall on one run, and they bounce back, and their speed is there the next lap, but their average looks like crap. So be careful looking at averages. You really just want to look at specific laps. Say, all right, where was he on lap 15? Where was he on lap 18? What was he doing? Because we're trying to differentiate between these top tiers and find out the drivers that we like. Okay, we will start with Tyler Reddick. Look at his laps. And how fitting that we're talking about Tyler Reddick. A guy was ripping me in the comments this week about, oh, this guy doesn't know anything. He likes Tyler Reddick. Tyler Reddick was fast at Texas. I still stand by. He had enough speed at Dover. He was not as fast as Hamlin and Larson. Ham and cheese. It did not work out for him. Stage 3 was kind of wonky at Kansas because of differing strategies. I'm not going to overreact to that. It was also a race that had been delayed hours. Here we go. After that guy just went after me, who was fast in practice, who qualified on the pole, it was Tyler Reddick. As I pretty much anticipated. And he has been good here in the past. So we look at his speeds. Again, not worried about him not going out and laying down the fastest lap ever. But his speed is fine. He has plenty of long run speed. He is going to be in clean air. He is one of the first guys that I'm definitely going to lean on. Now, he did run in Group A. So his speed is going to be a little bit more exaggerated than guys in Group B because the track was cleaner. Makes him run a little bit faster. But I'm not going to overreact too much to that for Tyler Reddick. You can see here, lap 18, he's still running 159.8. We compare that to some of these other guys. Now, Byron and Larson and Hamlin, I think, are probably ultimately better. And I like these cars probably a little bit more. Now, again, with Larson, or with Byron, as you'll see here, he comes out on a second run. And so he did deal well with the heat cycle on his tire. But he does benefit by going back out. So it's not a true apples to apples comparison, but this still is an 18 lap tire. He runs a 161.6, Reddick at a 159.8. I think you would feel comfortable arguing that Byron may have a little bit more speed than Reddick, but ultimately you really do need to give the advantage to Reddick at this moment because he is going to start on the pole and he is going to have a better pit position. Although he has not been that great in the pits, which ultimately we're going to give an advantage to Hamlin when we go to that conversation. But when I look at the data, at least when comparing the top 5 and the top 10, which I think we can take the top 10 out, right? Again, going back to our hog data and saying, where do we typically get our hogs or dominators? It's these first 3 rows, maybe the top 10. Not so much the top 10. And if we look at the top 10, I'm not crazy about the speeds that we have here. Bubba Wallace, that's significant fall off. Compared to the field, he's going to be fine. compared to the drivers starting up front that we think are going to lead laps, that ain't it. Ross Chastain, similar to what we saw at Dover, fall off happens, gets tight. Kansas, not Dover, Kansas. He complained of it in practice, and we saw the same thing in the race. And he doesn't benefit from having clean air like he did last week at Kansas. He's in a little bit more traffic. I don't think he'll be a driver that leads a bunch of laps, so we can cross him off in our top 10. Truex, it worries me that he didn't make a lot of laps, and he does fall off a little bit sooner, and he has not been better than Hamlin. He has not been better than Larson. I know that Truex at the end of Kansas said I was the fastest car out there. Yeah, because you were the closest to the front on 4 tires, and everybody else was saving fuel and managing. So sure, you had more speed, but again, that's not an apples to apples comparison. When all things were equal, ceteris paribus, Truex wasn't the fastest, and it doesn't appear right now that Truex has made really any gains on Hamlin. At the same time, Hamlin has a better pit crew. Larson has a better pit crew. Byron, I would have to double check, likely has a better pit crew. Actually, I think that might be even. Either way, pretty even. I think the edge goes to the other drivers. Not considering it. Not considering Busch. Bell, a lot of speed here in the run. Again, we don't want to worry about averages, but when we look deeper in the run, he was good, also in Group A, but Hamlin had more speed. Hamlin's had more speed all season. Hamlin's been better on pit road. Hamlin has more experience and success here. I go Hamlin. Same thing with Larson. We look at lap 117, lap 118. He pits after 18, goes back out. So again, not a completely fair comparison, but then is still able on a 22 lap tire run at 160. Bell's in the 159, 158. Again, not completely fair because Bell's out there running a whole run, whereas Larson went back out. But still, these are old tires. He's still able to go out there and run fast laps. If you want to go before the break, we can go down here, 159, 160. Larson showed a little bit more speed. I know it's practice. We don't want to overreact, but that's just one example. Who's been faster this season? Larson. So you got to give Larson the edge. Larson starting close to the front. We'll have a better pit stall than Christopher Bell. So we got it narrowed down to take some of these guys out. Beyond Bell, I don't think any of these guys are going to lead laps and run fast laps. There'll be a conversation for value. There'll be a conversation for place differential. But right now, we are looking at Hamlin to lead laps for sure. Remember, we got to pick 2. We want to pick the 2 that may not necessarily be the best overall, but can finish the race. Hamlin can finish the race and should be a contender for that. Larson should finish the race. Again, we've seen him wreck as well. Hamlin had the loose wheel in the previous race. But if we're looking at the contenders for leading laps and running fast laps and finishing in that top 3, Byron, Larson, Hamlin. Now, what about Gibbs, Buescher, and Keselowski? Keselowski did everything you need him to do in terms of showing speed on his long run in Group B. RFK had speed last week. Can he do it? Well, I think if we are overreacting to practice data, Buescher seems the least likely, suffering the most significant fall off in these laps compared to the other drivers. I also think Gibbs is right there as well, suffering much more fall off than Hamlin, Larson, and Byron. Keselowski is very tricky. He's very scary. He does everything you want him to do. Here he is in lap 24 running a 158.2. Not too far back from where Denny Hamlin's running 158.7. 158.5 on lap 25 for Hamlin, 158.1 for Keselowski. And this really can't be understated. Weeks ago, we were seeing Brad Keselowski make several pit stops during practice, tinkering, trying to find speed. And they found that speed at Kansas. And here we are at Darlington. He's able to just go out and run. And this looks like they nailed the setup. Reddick, Byron, Larson, Hamlin are my favorites. I want to pick those 2. The next guy down is going to be Keselowski. He will likely be the least owned, but he is definitely in play. He has checked every box that you need, and from a DFS standpoint, may go overlooked, maybe passed upon because, yeah, Reddick and Byron and Larson and Hamlin have all been so good. He's also going to give you a little bit of savings. So that's kind of where I stand, or not kind of where, that's where I stand if I'm trying to pick those two. From there, you got to figure out your place differential plays. From there, you got to figure out your value. We'll talk about those in the next podcast. Agree, disagree. Hopefully that was pretty helpful for you and helping you navigate who the hogs or dominators will be. If you like this data, you want to manipulate on your own, play around with it, racefortheprize.com, Venmo, PayPal, Cash App. If you don't want to pay full price, you just want to leave a tip, that's fine, man. Just send it over. Venmo, PayPal, Cash App. It's in the description below. It's at racefortheprize.com. Truly blessed to have you guys around. Love you guys. Trip. Delay. Fantastic.